The real issue that we're talking about, summarized, is this. It is that our traffic congestion in our urban areas around the country is getting worse and worse. And it's not just that it takes a few extra minutes to go to work compared to what was the situation before. I'll get out of the way here. But it is also very clear that traffic congestion destroys economic growth and it increases poverty. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. We are just releasing a report fairly soon now called Solving the Freight Transportation Bottleneck through Heartland. And I'm going to go through some of the most important points in the somewhat limited time we have available, hoping that all this works. However, first an advertisement. Usually when I give speeches on behalf of Heartland and others around the world, in fact, I'm talking about housing affordability. And I don't want to spend much time on this, but I want you all to realize, as legislators especially, the housing affordability problem that we have in the United States today is being driven by land use planning, otherwise called smart growth. And where you have smart growth and strong land use regulation, you have house prices as much as 10 times incomes, as in California, where you have traditional land use planning that has been the secret of the success of the expansion of the middle class in the United States since World War II. You have house prices 3 times incomes. We do an annual international housing affordability survey covering 160 markets in 6 countries. You might want to look at it on our website, mydemographia.com website. The reason I mention this is because, in my view, as regards domestic economic issues, there is none more important. Because today, for example, if you go and buy the median price house in San Diego, you can expect to pay in price and mortgage interest $1 million more than you did 10 years ago. But let's get off that and go now to freight rail, mobility, and economic growth. First of all of the evidence indicates that increasing mobility increases, and there is a strong relationship between increased mobility, the ability to get around cities and so on quickly, and economic growth. This is data from the OECD, which is the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, showing over the last 500 years how incomes have gone up as we have become more mobile, and how during the 1800s, with the coming of public transit, things got better. They didn't get nearly as good as they did later with the car, but the car, which is the target of much of the environmental movement today, believe me, it is a target of those who would destroy our economies by attempting to do stupid things to reduce greenhouse gases. We're talking about things that are really important. And I think James's presentation this morning on getting into the economics and the strategies of reducing greenhouse gas emissions is absolutely crucial, because if we're going to do this stupid thing, we better do smart things in the process, if you know what I mean. Now, meanwhile, if you look at later data, what you find is that there is a very strong correlation between the number of daily motorized trips in the world and the affluence of people. Again, mobility and economic growth are very closely tied. In fact, you think about this, a couple of marvelous studies out of the Brookings Institution, actually one I'll mention, which is of course a center-left think tank that sometimes does good work and sometimes does dreadful work, especially in their Metropolitan Policy Division. But in any event, what they basically said, if you want low-income people to have jobs, you will give them cars. Or you can take the research out of the University of California that says, if you want to reduce African American unemployment, you will give them cars, those households that don't have it. That you would actually have the difference between white non-Hispanic unemployment and African American unemployment if the unemployed had access to cars. Because anybody that knows anything about demographic and transport knows that all of the new jobs are being created in the suburbs, and there isn't a public transit system in the world, not in Europe, not in Japan, and not in the United States, that can get you to the jobs in the suburbs. Okay, continuing on, let's get now to the issue of freight rail and how freight rail can be a strategy to help reduce urban traffic congestion in the long run. Because you see, the basic problem is trucks, which are wonderful and have done much to improve the economic performance of our society, they take up 3.5 car lengths. And that creates a situation where they increase traffic congestion. Now, if we were increasing the size of our roads, that wouldn't be a problem. But we're not increasing the size of our urban roads, and so we've got to look at alternatives. I'm not saying that ways to get more freight onto freight rail is the only answer. I am saying it is one of the ways we can help to reduce traffic congestion in the long run. But here what you see is over the last 30 years in Europe and in Japan, how freight rail's market share has gone nowhere, has stayed the same. At the same time in the United States, most people don't realize it, there has never been a time in the history of the United States where so much freight was being carried by freight rail. Then you look at the United States, the traffic congestion all over. All of our major cities have traffic congestion, and it's getting worse, and it's only going to get worse because the only way people can get around, I don't care how much money you put into it, the only way people can get around is by car. So if you look at the domestic freight shares in the United States, you see, believe it or not, look at this, that freight rail actually carries more ton miles of freight than trucks. This surprises a lot of people. The freight rail industry has been very successful. You can see here over the last 15 years or so, freight rail holding very well. We have air that had a little bit of a drop in terms of its rise, obviously, because of 9/11. But trucks and freight are doing very well in terms of increasing their movement of freight. The rail industry has done very well. We can see, again, similar, this is just in the gross numbers. Now, the interesting thing, however, you would have expected that with the building of the interstate highway system in the 1960s and the 1970s, principally, that would be the period during which freight rail would lose its greatest share to the trucks. Not so. The greatest loss of freight rail to the trucks was in the 50s when there were a lot of passenger trains on the rail. What a lot of people don't realize is that there is no nation in the world, no first world nation, that has both a first-class freight rail system and a first-class passenger rail system. You have to make a choice. So Europe's chosen to go with passenger, and we've chosen to go with freight, and I would suggest to you that the results have been much better in this country as a result of it.